We have a great panel 3. I'd just like to acknowledge Francine LeFrak, who is not only our dear friend and sponsor of so many of our programs in Jersey City, but the CEO of SameSky, which makes magnificent jewelry not only in Rwanda, but in New Jersey. So thank you very much, Francine. We have Judge Kirsch here, and we have David Keene. Can we have a round of applause for David? Mayor Torres, our dear friend, Mayor Jackson, the chief, but leads our reentry program every day. He manages our reentry program. He's been a vigorous force for change and for ramping up, and I'm blessed to work with the greatest team ever. We work hard, God willing, we work smart, and they suffer working with a lunatic, as my daughter will say, me, but I'm blessed to work with this team, but our reentry manager, John Koufos. John?
Thank you, Governor McGreevey. So today we're going to talk about reentry at work. And before we get to our panelists, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I probably could have sat on any of the panels today from experience. Right? My father is in federal prison now and was through most of my childhood. I developed an alcohol issue that sent me to prison myself. In the interim, I found time to go to law school and become a trial attorney. And then, through recovery, through sobriety, I found this program here in Jersey City. And it's against that backdrop that I've been blessed to be a part of a team in a city where real change is occurring on a national scale, as was mentioned before. And I think that what we're going to hear about on this panel is how reentry works in the communities, as well as the different sort of players that come into it. So just a 5,000 feet view of what we do. There's really 3 forms of ways to come through reentry. You max out of a sentence, meaning you're under no mandate. You're supervised, either on probation or parole, or you're diverted by law enforcement from the beginning. And I think our panelists today represent a cross-section of policymakers, the judiciary, and law enforcement members who are doing this work every day, as well as partnerships with philanthropy, and then a conservative voice. So with that, I'd like to start with Mr. Keene, who, of course, was the president of the NRA, as we've heard. He's the opinion editor at the Washington Times, and a conservative voice that one might not expect in a venue such as this. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Keene.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a real honor for me to be here today. I'm always a little nervous when I join a group of people who actually do more than talk or write. Because the people that you've heard from this morning have experienced the problems, have worked with people that are incarcerated, have been incarcerated themselves, and they're from law enforcement, and they're the people on the ground that have to do the work to straighten out a system that really isn't working very well in this country. We all know the figures about how many people are in prison, how many laws we have, how difficult it is. And I was thinking as we talk about them, about these people coming out, and something like 600,000 people a year come out of all of the institutions in this country. And the purpose of the criminal justice system is to not just to punish, not just to lock people away, though there are certainly people who deserve punishment, and there are certainly people who we have every right to be afraid of, who ought to be locked away. But the purpose of the system is to enforce the law and to make sure that when someone has paid their, quote, debt to society, they can rejoin the civil society. And we've created a system that takes too many people, locks them up, and brands them so that they really can't rejoin the civil society in any meaningful way. And I first got involved with this when I thought about that a couple of decades ago. You know, in 30, 40 years ago, if somebody went to prison, he couldn't get a job when he came out as a bank teller, maybe. But he could get a job. And technology and the way we view things and insurance companies and the like since then have made it impossible in many cases for that person to get a job as a ditch digger, because the construction, everybody now does background checks on everybody. And people say, well, why take a chance? Why do that? Just let's play it safe and hire somebody else. So that the biggest problem we have, and one of the major reason, as has been stated up here, for recidivism, is that once people get out into the society that they've supposedly been prepared to rejoin, they find out that what they've got is a ticket to nowhere, because they can't rejoin that society. They often can't find some place to live. They often can't get a job. And I was thinking about it. I thought about that. I attended a GED graduation ceremony in a federal prison a couple of years ago. And there was one young man who had gotten his GED, studied for it in prison. His parents had driven 12 hours to get there for the ceremony. They were proud, he was proud, and then they had to get back in their cars and drive 12 hours home so that they could go back to work. And I sat there watching them in their happiness, realizing that they didn't know it, but that wasn't going to matter very much once he got out into the real world, because it was going to be very difficult for him, even with that, to find meaningful work. I was reminded of that just earlier this week. The Washington Post, which I mentioned even though I work for the other paper, ran a story on a woman from Maryland who 25 years ago had been released after having killed the stepfather who'd abused her, and was then released. She was the first woman to get an undergraduate degree while incarcerated in the state of Virginia. She went on to get a master's degree. She managed research laboratories for hospitals and medical companies. She made about $150,000 a year, and all of a sudden people began checking back 30 and 40 years, and now she's unemployed, losing her house, living on food stamps, and can't get a job. Was most recently turned down for a job at Walmart for this. And she had a master's degree and had not broken a law. Well, it's not true. It said she did have one minor infraction in that she failed to renew her license on time for her car and got a notice. But that was, in 25 years, that was her sole transgression with the law, and yet her life was destroyed, and she now doesn't know what she's going to do because she can't work anywhere. So those are real problems. And what we need to do is think about how we solve it, and what's going on here is great. And the interesting thing is that finally it is going on around the country. For many years, any talk of criminal justice reform hit a brick wall because you basically had people talking past each other in the political sphere, which is where the policy is made. Some people saying that it wasn't the criminal's fault. Other people saying everybody ought to be locked up and punished more harshly. And nobody looking at whether or not the system was serving the function that it should have been serving, whether it was for fulfilling the mission for which it was established, which was to make us a safer, more rational, and more just society. I remember when the former Attorney General of Virginia, Ken Cuccinelli, received an award from the Innocence Project. He said that the problem with the criminal justice system is that too many people forget the middle word, and that there's not enough emphasis on justice within the system. So the problem is, how do you do something about that? And everybody's got a solution, but it's a piecemeal solution. We can do this, we can do that, but if there was ever a societal problem that requires more than a piecemeal solution, it's the problems we face with the criminal justice system. We lock up too many people. We have too many laws. Bernie Carrick talked about the fellow who caught too big a fish or too small a fish. In a rational society, that's not a reason to put somebody in jail. Pat Nolan, who was instrumental in the Second Chance Act and the prison rape legislation, worked for the Prison Fellowship, put it well when he said, you know, we should and probably have to lock up people we're afraid of, but the prisons are filled with people we're mad at, and that is not a reason to put them in prison.
Oh, I would tweet that.
If, in fact, the problem in reentry is created by the brand one receives by going to prison, then the first step in solving the reentry problem is not sending everybody to prison for everything on earth. Robert Jackson, back when he was appointed by Franklin Roosevelt as Attorney General of the United States, called his deputies together, and there weren't many laws back then. They thought there were, but compared to today. And he said, do you realize that we have the power to pick out any citizen in this country, and if we work at it long enough, to send him to prison? But that's not our job. And it's not the job of the criminal justice system. It's not the job of prosecutors, and indeed the job of the police. But one thing that has to be done is we have to focus the law and the justice system on those people that need to be locked up, and not just on everybody that breaks a law or a regulation, whether or not they intended to, because many of the 4,500 federal laws today don't even require what's called mens rea, don't even require that you know about it or that you have any intention of committing a crime, and you can still go to prison. That's the first step. The second step, of course, is once someone is in prison, if they can't be diverted to other kinds of ways to pay their debt to society, if you will, is that they deserve humane treatment. And that's something that exists in some prisons and not others. As Pat Nolan also said once, we don't have a prison system in this country. We have prisons. And each of them is an empire of its own. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, just like many corrections officers are good people, some of them aren't. If you watch B movies from the 50s and 60s, the place that was considered worst was Angola State Prison in Louisiana. It's now a model prison because a new warden came in, a deputy warden, and they said, this is going to change. And the same things happened elsewhere.
Thank you, David. If I could jump in. Dave, big round of applause for David, please.
I didn't mean to filibuster.
You didn't at all. David hit on a lot of interesting issues, including sort of finding the solutions to problems. And, here in Jersey City, in Hudson County, we have a model that's based in addiction treatment with mental health treatment for co-occurring diagnoses, sober transitional housing, so placement with other people in recovery subject to urinalysis, and then employment training and job development. And in that, we've built other services. David hit a point just a minute ago about the person who had the driving violation. And, one of the first things that my background as a lawyer, was able to bring to our program were legal services, pro bono legal services, to help folks clear up old warrants, to clear up these driver's licenses, to clear up these issues that Mr. Keene was mentioning before. And these really are important because these are relating to identification. And identification is something most of us don't even think about. We have it, we present it. But for the average person coming out of prison, if they have the option of getting a birth certificate in jail, but they don't frequently because you get it deducted from your commissary account, and making whatever you make per day, you may not have the money to do that. So these folks come out, and we have to clear the wreckage that the legal system, that their conduct has caused, both legally, not just for their crimes, and the offshoots. And it's interesting because I think the county jail population sees that most people come in for warrants of $200, $100, they just can't afford to pay. So we've taken this model, this Jersey City and Hudson County model, and we're in the process of replicating it across the state through the New Jersey Reentry Corporation. And part of that, one of the most progressive cities on this issue right now is Patterson. And Mayor Torres is here with us. So, Mayor, if you could give us sort of a snapshot of your views in reentry and some of Patterson's sort of specific problems and how we can get the reentry debate, the reentry services to Patterson, and what you think is most prevalent that needs to be addressed. Because, of course, each jurisdiction has a little bit different issue. If you could, Mayor Torres.
Yes, thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you this afternoon. We all have personal feelings as to why we do what we do. Our lives have been touched by seeing loved ones incarcerated, suffering the ills of drug addiction, impacted by life-threatening disease, or just leaving this world way too soon. As mayor of the city of Patterson, I am committed to taking serious steps to address such painful issues. Governor McGreevey and John and his team came to Patterson and ignited my team to work relentlessly to bring a reentry, or as I like to call it, a new entry, program that provides wraparound services to support the successful return of the incarcerated. Where we are, it's called the House of Hope. We have a site that will house the program that will be named the House of Hope. We are working with the Passaic County officials to ensure the services we provide meets the needs of our constituents as they return home, and an investment in human capital. Our plans include providing them while they are incarcerated with an intense substance abuse treatment program and counseling services, as we complete an assessment tool that will assist staff to address the individual needs of the participant, recognizing that it's cheaper to educate than to incarcerate. The assessment will help my team gain accurate knowledge of the skill levels relative to education, medical, dental, residential, mental health, and employment and job training. We will also provide family unification and social service assistance, including family involvement, reentry planning, and employment readiness. Passaic County has created a committee and has created a steering committee, and the following organizations has engaged in it: the Passaic County Board of Chosen Freeholders, the Workforce Development Agency, the Office of the Prosecutor, the Passaic County Division of Mental Health and Addiction Services, the Sheriff Department, the Warden, the Mayor of the City of Passaic, and the Mayor of the City of Clifton, the County Department of Health and Human Services, and the staff at Martin Place. Since my administration has developed shared service agreement with both Jersey City and Newark, Patterson is a unique situation to get much more accomplished. Last week, I completed 6 town hall meetings throughout the city to discuss this prevalent issue, and we are excited as we're drafting grants to support the programmatic pieces as well as the substance abuse and mental health services. We discussed our excitement of our new entry program, and at the end of the last session, a grandmother approached me and asked that she be notified as soon as we start this program, because her grandson was in Passaic County Jail, and she wanted him to become connected to the program before he is released, and certainly to stay connected. We have identified that House of Hope, what I call emphatically the belly of the beast. And we feel that by creating this House of Hope right in the center of those places where they have to come home back to, not only it will support those who are coming home, but eventually the word will get out and will support the community that just could walk into this House of Hope and get the necessary services before they are incarcerated. These stories are the reason why my administration has embraced this initiative wholeheartedly, especially for me at the belly of the beast, where the House of Hope is going to be located. It will have to become not only a major cornerstone of my administration in terms of the physical revitalization of the ward, but also of its social renaissance and the investment in our human capital. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share the good news about Patterson, New Jersey.
Thank you, Mayor Torres. Now, what we're hearing, right, what Mayor Torres was talking about is partnerships, right? And it's breaking down sort of walls that may have sort of over time formed over systems that have always existed. Many of the systems we tap into for effective reentry or new entry or diversion for all these criminal justice services, they exist. They exist in the jails. They exist in the welfare services in the county. They exist at the state level, and they exist through the Department of Labor. And the idea is, and now with the advent of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, they exist across many of those systems, both from a registration point in the jail to an implementation point immediately when the offender is released. So the idea of partnerships is an undercurrent in reentry. And we come to Francine LeFrak, who's been a tremendous partner with the SameSky Foundation. Her organization's partnered with Gloria Walton from Most Excellent Way, who we've heard from before. And Francine, if you wouldn't mind talking to us about what SameSky does and your sort of selfless dedication to our reentry efforts.
Thank you so much. First of all, I really want to thank and acknowledge the vision of Mayor Steve Fulop, who really understood and understands the importance of addressing this problem. And the greatest philanthropy, I believe, is a good job. and he understood that. And of course, he had the intrepid Governor Jim McGreevey there with his dedication, 1,000%, to really wanting, from the bottom of his heart, to find a way to solve the problem. So Jim McGreevey said to me, and I had started a business in Rwanda where I gave genocide survivors, as you know, in 1994, 1 million people were murdered in 100 days, and 250,000 women were raped, and 70% became HIV. And I decided to give those women a job because I also believe talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. And if I could help lift them out of poverty, then their families, their communities, and everything would change. So Jim McGreevey said to me, you know, I'm having such problems with, I'm so inspired and I'm so dedicated to the people at Hudson County Jail, but I can't get them jobs. Can you help me? And I said, well, why don't we take the women, because I know that, number one, America is the largest incarcerator of women, and that 85% of the women have children, and they really need help. And I said, well, why don't they make jewelry like we do in Rwanda? The program in Rwanda is so successful. Look at poverty in America. More than 45 million people live below the poverty line. 16 million children are on food stamps. Where are the women who get out of prison and need a job on that list? They're at the bottom of the list. They have incarceration, as we know, sort of with them all the time. And for them to go and get a job, it is so, so difficult. So I said, if we give them beautiful materials, like the materials of these bracelets, and we teach them how to make the bracelets, I think we'll have an amazing result. So Jim introduced me to the most incredible woman, Gloria Walton, and Gloria Walton created this most excellent halfway house. And what's so special about it is I had no idea that the women had court fees, court dates. They had so many things that they had to deal with. They had emotional problems. They had drug problems. They had so many different problems. Well, this was the perfect storm because Gloria gave them the emotional support that they needed to go on in the world. And if I could give them a job, which was the only piece that was missing, giving them a job. So we created the idea of the women working around a table, almost like a knitting bee, where they worked with each other in silence, and their focus was that table. They weren't thinking about the outside and the pull of the streets. They were connecting to their creativity. They were connecting to their heart. They were connecting to the simple use of their hands. And by connecting, they realized, gee, I can be trained. Maybe I can do other things. And they were so inspirational because they were able to do this at their own time. So whether it's late at night or early in the morning, it really gave them the space to go and deal with the courts, to go and get a GED, to go and maybe train for another job or apply for another job. And as astounding as the results are in Rwanda, that's how astounding the results are in Jersey City. So it is this perfect storm, and I loved, Mayor Torres, what you said about the Hope House. It's exactly what we're talking about. So it really is a partnership. It's city, it's state, and hopefully we'll be launching a food truck pretty soon to give more jobs. But anyway, I want to tell you a little about the women. The women, let's say Tanya. Tanya is now getting her GED, and she's learning, there she is, she's learning how to be a parent. Both of her children have been involved in the prison system, and now she's learning how to get custody of them again. She's learning her own dignity and self-esteem that she gets from work, but she's back in high school at 37 years old, and I take my hat off to Tanya. And then there was Angelique, and Angelique you know, she was sort of artistic. She didn't know what she was going to do. But one of the things she was good at counting beads. She was good at bossing the women around the table. And she said, wait a minute, I like business. I want to be a manager. And she's now taking courses to become a manager. So God bless Angelique. Then one of the other women now, and I'm not going to mention her name because she's working at Supercuts, and you know there's a stigma if I tell you her name, and so she's asked me not to. But she has a job and she has dreams. And it's all about the idea that we can no longer be invisible. We can no longer treat these people as if they're invisible. We've got to put energy into them. I mean, Paul Fishman was saying maybe the numbers aren't great and it's really hard to scale up, but we have to start somewhere. And I'm sure somebody out there has a great idea. It doesn't have to be jewelry. It could be anything. That's something that you're really talented at. Find a way to give jobs to those people in a reentry program. And I'll tell you why. Number one, you're going to get a great employee. You're going to get someone who's completely dedicated. You're going to get someone who wants a second chance in life, and you will, you know, be so inspired by how hard they're working to get a second chance. So my advice to everyone is think about that thing that you're really good at, and I promise you, you'll get the best employees and the greatest satisfaction. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Francine. You know, what Francine sort of touched on as well is, you know, reentry, our place on Martin Luther King Drive here in Jersey City, in many ways is like a social triage center. Some of these folks don't have GEDs, they don't have education, and they equate that with no opportunity. And I think when Mayor Torres calls Patterson's place a house of hope, here in Jersey City, we've had this, we've been able to create a house and a culture of hope up and down MLK. And the idea is because we have everyone working together from diverse systems, from no matter what side of the political arena you might be on, we have folks in this country now who are willing to give a second chance and to fashion intelligent and rational solutions to the criminal justice issue and fashion reentry at its highest level. Now, but where do these folks start? Now, we heard on panel one, it starts in their childhood. And we have Judge Kirsch from Union County, and Judge Kirsch runs the juvenile court in Union County, and I'll turn it over to him, who's doing his court's doing some pretty interesting diversion issues. He'll tell you what he sees in that court. Thank you, Judge Kirsch.
Good afternoon. I'm quite sure that I am the sole representative from the judiciary here, and I'm honored to be so. In my 20-plus years of my career, both as a trial lawyer, as a prosecutor, and now as a judge, I've participated in an untold number of symposiums and conferences, none as impressive or as important as this one. I've been transfixed. I sat right in the front row, and I have been riveted and have learned quite a bit from each and every one of the participants, and so I'm honored to participate. I am a Superior Court judge, which is a trial court judge in Union County. Union County has a population of about 530,000 people, and it is an extremely eclectic, diverse bunch. We are 100-plus ethnicities, and with that, a whole myriad of social and law enforcement problems. I am the only judge assigned juvenile delinquency in the county. The volume is unrelenting and at times overwhelming. The level of violence, staggering. And at times it can be dispiriting. I handle about 1,000 cases a year. And those are not numbers. That is, each and every one is a person, is a child, is a brother, is a sister. And my perspective has been shaped by what I have seen and what I have learned. My prior life was after a prestigious clerkship. I was a trial lawyer at the Department of Justice in Washington, and then I was for many years a federal prosecutor right here in New Jersey. And so it would be sort of an unconventional transformation from where my background was to what I'm doing now and how I'm seeing my work, which is as a public servant. What I've learned is based on what I have seen. And what I have seen every day in my courtroom is an epidemic of a lack of fathers. Every young man, and it's predominantly young men who come into my courtroom, in the back, there'll be a DYFS worker, what's formerly known as DYFS, a mother, a heroic grandmother. But what I don't see, 95+% of the time, is a man, a positive male role model. And I ask, and if I could have a quarter for every time I got this response, where's your father? And the answer almost invariably is, he's locked up, he was locked up, and I don't know. And it is a national catastrophe on our collective conscience, and something has to be done about it, which is... So let me give you a statistic, and again, I'm not prone to statistics because this is what I see and what I know. 1.7 million American children have one or more than one parent incarcerated. Millions more in jails, state and local jails. And my idea, which is not heroic, there's nothing heroic about what I'm about to tell you. It was just an idea driving down to the courthouse in Elizabeth on a morning a year and change ago, where I decided as long as I'm privileged to have this position, I have to do something. Some different way of approaching a problem which we've been talking about for a generation, and it doesn't have to be a grandiose idea, but it has to be something that I do, not just a thought. And my thought was, I know a lot of people that have had struggles, very good friends of mine that have been caught up in the web of law enforcement. And they have a story to tell, like many of the stories we heard here today, and some you will hear as we go along. And so I picked up my cell phone on my way to the courthouse, and I called a friend of mine who I helped write his memoir, somebody I knew for 15 years, who had a story very, very much aligned with the overwhelming number of people who come before me. In fact, it could have been, with the exception of some luck and hard work, would have been somebody who came before me. Now he's a lawyer and works for a Fortune 100 company. And he grew up in Patterson, in the projects, single family, never lived with his father. His father died when he was 12. One of his siblings died from AIDS, another was locked up. He himself was arrested. And so I called him and I said, would you be willing to speak to my kids in detention? And it was just, and before I got it out, the answer was, I'm in. And so I've started this reentry initiative, which is a diversionary as well as a reentry initiative. And here's what I've learned. It's not that hard to do something. I made a couple of phone calls to the acting attorney general, and the chief justice is fully supportive. And so here's what we've done. I've got an array of speakers that I've hand-selected, and we have gone to Essex County, Passaic County, Union County, Mercer, Monmouth, Middlesex. We've addressed hundreds of kids that are locked up. And the program is as simple as this. I find somebody who's willing to tell in the most raw terms their story. They don't gloss over it. They don't sanitize it. It's very real. They speak for about 45 minutes, and then there's a question and an answer. And here's when I know it's a success, when I have to stop the question and answer because the kids, for time reasons, the kids are not letting us, at some point I got to go back to the courthouse and do what I'm paid to do. That's when I know it's a success. We've brought in service providers that after the Q&A, they stand up and they talk about mentoring, they talk about educational opportunities, they talk about employment opportunities, counseling, and the like, that are all accessible, that we all pay for. But so many of these young kids don't know how to ask for them. And then I asked the educators in these facilities to do a follow-up. And so I get the book reports or the reports as a result of this. And it has been, without question, the proudest thing of my professional life. And I'm quite sure it will always be. So what do I view the mission of today? What I view the mission of today is not just an exchange of very interesting and important ideas and concepts and platitudes. I view today about action. Each and every one of us have an obligation to leave this incredible symposium and do something.
Thank you, Judge Kirsch. Thank you. We next have Mayor Jackson, the mayor of the city of Trenton. Trenton, like Patterson and like Newark, Atlantic City, Toms River, will be following the Jersey City model that was made right here, started in the Hudson County Jail and came out through Mayor Fulop's vision and Governor McGreevy's execution. Trenton is in a unique position. Trenton has a lot of great social services agency down there, some of them represented here today. But Mayor Jackson, would you give us your view of reentry in Trenton and where you see it going sort of as a business attraction strategy?
Thank you very much. And I'm glad to be here today, and I want to thank Mayor Fulop again for this great conference and certainly the vision, and to my dear friend, Governor McGreevy, for the execution of the great work that I know goes beyond work, but it's a passion of love for you as well. Thank you for that, and to everyone assembled. Specifically in Trenton and in the Mercer County area, we have great nonprofits who have been about the business of reentry work. What I found as a long-term city resident in Trenton and one who worked in public service in Trenton for about 20 years and now the mayor is that while we have a plethora of social service agencies, businesses that all work independently to help in some capacity or another with reentry, what I found as a new mayor is that we weren't necessarily connecting the dots very well. What I thought we needed to do was use the model that the governor has here in Jersey City, that we could bring about greater collaboration so that we could create what's in essence called a one-stop shop for our reentry system. Again, a number of reentry programs that go on and actually are done very well. But when you have to move from side to town in an uncoordinated fashion, it helps folks, as you know, find their way to get off track or to go through areas where it may not necessarily be to their good. As mayor, one of the things that I know I'm committed to is making sure that we can connect our system so that the programs that we have are successful and create successful outcomes. So we're devising strategies as well, working with the governor to create a program in the city of Trenton where we have a one-stop shop, where we have all the connection of all the systems that will help get toward successful reentry. One of the things that has been a problem specifically in the city of Trenton, I'm sure you face it across your areas, is the issue, and it's been said many times here today, is the branding. And specifically for our city is work, have to find reentry. When in reentry, folks are coming out of prison, have such a difficult time finding employment. And the old adage is, if you're coming out, no one wants to give you a job. So we at the city of Trenton have tried to create as many opportunities specifically for people coming out of prison who've been out, met their requirements for a minimum of 6 months, to put them in seasonal type work to make sure that we can start a transition of individuals who do not want to go back into the system, who want to find a different way, and help them toward their life goals. Simply this, and it is simply this, and I've had this conversation so many times. They would say to me in the city of Trenton, how do I pay my child support? How do I pay my fines? How do I get my license back, which I'm required to have in order to get the job here if no one gives me a job to help do any of these things? So we said the right thing to do in our city was to create a pathway that would address some of these issues. So we simply, and did something very simply that we thought, created an easy system in and under a seasonal program. If you were committed to come every day, work hard, use that money to pay off your fees, your fines, get your license, reconnect with your families. We would then transition you into permanent jobs. I am proud to say today, hundreds of individuals, hundreds, have transitioned into permanent employees, become supervisors, have been able to, and that's good news, yes it is. But it's just one entity, which is the city, and we have a host of nonprofits who are working extremely hard to deal with our social needs, to deal with mental health needs, to deal with all the plethora of things that have to happen to really reintegrate individuals back into our society. And we recognize in the city of Trenton, this is one of the most compelling and significant problems and challenges that we have today. Because if we don't do that successfully, families in our city will not be healed and will not come together. So we're working hard, and we're proud to be able to work with the governor to use his model to make us more effective in the challenge that we know reentry works. And I'll end by telling you this story, why we are so committed to reentry. About 4 months ago, I was in one of our local dollar stores in the city. And a lady I didn't know, senior citizen, walked up to me and said, "Aren't you Mayor Jackson?" I said, "I am." And she just ran up to me and she hugged me and she embraced me, senior. And I thought she did it because I was the mayor. You know, you're the mayor, people want to hug you, right? It wasn't the case. She started crying and she said, "Mayor, because of you, my granddaughter is the first one in my family of many children to go to college." I said, "How is that because of me?" She said, "Because you took a chance and gave my son a job who was in prison for 7 years when nobody would employ him for 4 years. You took a chance and gave him a job. And out of that job, he began to save his money, and he's paying his way for his daughter to go to college." Reentry does work, does change lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Jackson. Thank you. You know, reentry up here in the Hudson County Jail, I always say, began with a badge with Warden Aviles about 5 years ago. And today we have Commissioner Batts from the Baltimore PD, and then after him, Jaclyn Cherubini from the Hoboken Homeless Shelter. At least up in New Jersey, we've seen law enforcement and the homeless problem sort of being hand-in-hand issues, whereas law enforcement is running into a number of homeless folks throughout, and it's the shelter's responsibility to help them. So if we could start with Commissioner Batts, you tell us the work you're doing in Baltimore in the reentry and diversion field.
Thank you for having me, and I'm humbled to be here with you. I was over by the bathroom at lunchtime, and I had several women run up to me and say, "Are you Mayor Jackson?" They started hugging on me back here. Just joking, Mayor. Thank you for having me here. This is not a traditional symposium that police officers attend or I normally attend, but I brought one of my deputy commissioners who oversees my patrol unit, Dean Paul Meir, and I wanted him to hear what was going on in this room. And I do a very diligent job in getting my command staff out to different things that we normally wouldn't attend so we can grow and that we can improve. In Baltimore, we have a reentry program, and we have one guy in the reentry program. I have an officer that's in the local jail, and we have one officer that's in the local jail. What I can tell you is that in some parts of the city of Baltimore, the uniform that we wear, there's a visceral hatred for the police officers who wear that uniform. As we all have seen over the months, is that you have 100 American cities that have protested what police officers do or how we govern over citizens and communities, and the city of Baltimore is no different. Baltimore is the third city that I've been chief of police or commissioner in. I come from Southern California. I started in Long Beach, went to Oakland, and into Baltimore, and I take on very tough cities. And I take on very tough police departments. And Baltimore is no different. It is a hard-charging, traditional police organization. But you know what made me want to move to different parts of different cities and help to make a change in a different way? I see policing not just dealing with justice. I see it as our mandate is to deal with social justice too, and take on non-traditional issues and to be leaders along those lines. And the reason for that is just this Saturday, my cousin died, and he's going to be buried on Tuesday, and my aunt asked me to speak at his funeral. Now, my cousin has become famous internationally because I have used his name and his story throughout the world as I've given speeches in Europe and in South America and in Africa about American policing and some of the issues that we have. And my cousin Ricky has been that foundation, and he's also the foundation of why I try to change police departments. And what I mean by that is I was born in Washington, D.C., and my family matriculated to Southern California. And I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. And during the time that I was there, I grew up in a very impoverished environment where there was gang activity, drugs, dysfunctionality, all the things, prostitution that you can imagine. And I could have easily went left. I could have easily went the opposite direction of what I did. And in my family, my mom's family, she has 16 brothers and sisters by one grandmother. And they grew up, yeah, that's right, one grandmother. They grew up in the South, and we kind of exchanged kids when we were growing up. My aunts and my uncles, if a kid was having a bad trouble in one neighborhood because we were in different places, we sent them to another place. So my cousin Ricky was getting involved in gang activity here in here on the East Coast in Washington D.C. area, and so my aunt sent him to California to live with us. And it was really good for me to have my cousin Ricky there because it was me and my sister. And in an impoverished neighborhood that I lived in, everybody had 5 or 6 brothers and sisters. So if you got in a fight with one brother, you got beat up by all the 4 brothers. So having cousin Ricky back me up was really good to bring him out because cousin Ricky was a good fighter. Come on, you got to stay with me here, would you? So when cousin Ricky came out there, he did fairly well for a period of time. And then after 2 years, my mom sent him back because he started impacting me a little bit. And the reason I'm telling you this story is that I come from a family of overachievers. And we have people in law enforcement, and we have people on the other side. And cousin Ricky said he was going into banking. He meant one thing, and I thought he meant something else. But like I like to share is cousin Ricky was a bank robber. And he and his cousins from the opposite side of the family robbed about 10 or 12 banks. Serious takeovers, automatic weapons, guns, and taking over 10 to 12 banks. And I recall the FBI knocking on the door of my home early one morning looking for him when they were trying to identify him and knew that he had lived with us for some point in time. Cousin Ricky went to prison for probably, he went in when I was 16. I think he came out when I was about 40. So he was in prison for an extensive amount of time. And I remember him calling me collect a couple times to talk to me. And I told him, don't call me, dude. Don't call me. Don't connect me with your phone calls. Don't call me collect. And see, I'm missing with all my jokes with you guys. I'm in the wrong crowd. Hop, I'm missing with the jokes, right? But cousin Ricky would call me collect. And cousin Ricky would talk about when he got out, how he wanted the house and the white picket fence. And that he had grown out of his criminality and he just wanted to have a normal life. And eventually he got out, and when he got out, the best thing he could do, and with the help of the family, helping him get his driver's license and his birth certificate and all the things you need and get him a suit that he could wear to the job interview, is that he got a job at Popeye's Chicken. And the best he could do is to work minimum wage. And so as he worked minimum wage, it becomes very difficult for you to get a house or have that American dream just like everyone else. So cousin Ricky started living off of women. And so he would go to one woman and stay with one woman and impregnate her, and she would deal with him for a long, then he'd go to another one and do the same thing over and over. And so he had, several kids, and he couldn't make it. And eventually what happened is he got back into drugs, and he went into an IHOP in the middle of the day and robbed an IHOP that had tons of witnesses in it. So he just wanted to go back to prison. And that's where he went. He went back to prison. He went back several times. My cousin died in prison Saturday. He died from liver cancer in there, and he was in the hospital for 31 days, and my aunt didn't even know he was sick until they gave the call that he had passed in prison as a whole. But the reason I say that is cousin Ricky has become my impetus to change in policing. And not only talking about reentry, because part of me being here is I talked to Mr. Koufos last year and said I want to know more about how to build a more robust system for reentry, because when young men come out of incarceration, they're coming back to those communities. And how can we help them in a positive way? And how can the police department lead that change? But we're talking about in Baltimore's pre-entry, not reentry, but pre-entry to stop kids from getting into the system. Because I'll be very honest with you, when crime goes up in the city of Baltimore, say that robberies go up. Dean, what did I tell you to do when robberies go up in a general area? We focus on recidivists. man, these guys are off today. We focus on recidivists, so we go back to those areas where we have those high crimes, and we go to those people who are out on parole or probation, and we see if they match up with the criminals or the descriptions, so we put them back in the system. That's the same thing that happened to my cousin Ricky. He got sucked up a couple times, went back to jail. This last time, and cousin Ricky was pretty honest. When he did something, he'd say, I did that. This last one, he said, I didn't do that. And he still went into prison, and that's where he remained. But what we're doing is that we're trying to make a difference in a different way with pre-entry. I have officers in non-traditional ways reading to 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. And why do I do that? Because if you read the data that's out there, is if a kid can't read by the time they're in the 3rd grade, they start detaching from school. When they start detaching from school, they start grouping with other people of their ilk. And that means groups, gangs, crews, whatever you want to call them. Then they get into violent activities, and then they start getting shot at, and then they start having babies all over again. And so the cycle continues with itself. So when I have these officers, these very tough, macho, hardcore, hard-charging police officers sit down with a 5-year-old child, and I do it every Tuesday at 8:30 in the morning. My young man, his name is Antonio, and he's the cutest thing in the world. Antonio sits down with me. Sir.
I'm sorry, Commissioner. We're just
I got to cut it short.
time.
Okay,
Yeah.
cut it short.
Thank you.
I have a gun. Long story short, to sum it up, we're going in non-traditional ways, teaching young kids how to read. We're having kids at camps that deal with character building. We're finding funding to make an impact in coaching. We're going into healthy neighborhoods where we're looking for non-traditional metrics, not just homicides and robberies, but single mothers, et cetera, et cetera. And we're trying to change those dynamics. Non-traditional for a police department. I get pushed back when people say, are you a social worker? And I say, we're not there to be a social worker. We're here for social justice, but we're here to change and help so we don't have to have a reentry program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And finally, we're going to conclude a key portion of the reentry problem is homelessness. Homelessness is actually almost as large a predictor of recidivism, if not larger, than addiction itself. And with that, we have Jaclyn Cherubini from the Hoboken shelter. Jaclyn, can you give us a very brief overview of the court-involved folks that you see coming through your doors in, say, 3 to 4 minutes?
Sure. At the Hoboken shelter, we shelter 50 people nightly. We serve over 500 meals every day. In addition, we provide support services to help people become housed. And I think the theme of today that I'm taking away is a theme of hope. You know, that the story today is hope. Because without hope, as Liz said earlier, that you can't do anything. And honestly, I love that we're talking about jobs. Jobs has come up several times today because what we do when you become a shelter guest is the very first thing we do is give you a volunteer activity at the shelter. And one of the reasons why we do this is it gives someone a set of expectations. They know, I trust you to do this. You know that you trust me, that I'm going to expect you to do this. There's a set of mutual expectations there that is something that was said earlier, like I think the prison system takes the dignity, takes the humanity away from people. And it's one of the things we do every day. I go to work every day, and it's one of the expectations that I have and that have of me. So what's important, too, is to develop the skills that people have and also develop the hidden talents. That there's so many interests that people have that they don't know that they have because many years it was not even asked, it was not expected, it was suppressed and oppressed, and now I am talking to them about, what do you want to do? What can you do?
Jaclyn,
let's figure that out.
How long of a stay would someone be in the shelter before you're able to typically see them move on to more stable housing? How do we get them on that path?
Last year we had 141 of our guests move from the streets to our shelter to their own homes. So every other day I saw someone leaving the shelter with keys to their own home. And the average stay is about, oh, thank you, about 3.5 to 5.5 months. And really every time we ask a guest, what are your goals when you stay here? We have them set the expectation. The very first thing is, I need a job, then I can find an apartment, and then I can reconnect with my family.
And Jaclyn, I hate to cut you short. You're doing such amazing work at the shelter, serving as sort of the homeless triage center of Hoboken and in many parts of Hudson County. And We're honored to work with you and share
Thank
our
you.
clients. Thank you to all of the speakers,
You're welcome, sir.
and thank you to the audience.
Do we have a round of applause for panel 3?